Picture yourself on a hot, still afternoon in the Arizona Territory, somewhere in the 1880s. You are a homesteader. You've spent years on this patch of hard ground, dug the well by hand, raised the house beam by beam, buried more than one hope in the dust out back, and finally, against everything the desert could throw at you, made it yours. It is the one thing in the world you are certain of. And now there is a stranger at your gate, a well-dressed man, soft-spoken, courteous, with a leather case under his arm, and he has come a long way to tell you something in a voice so calm and so sorry that it takes a moment to sink in. He tells you that the ground your house stands on is not yours. It never was. It belongs, he explains, to a Spanish noble family whose claim runs back over 100 years, granted by the crown of Spain itself, and honored, he adds gently, by the government of the United States. He is their agent. He is not unkind about it. He simply lays the papers on your table. Old documents, foreign seals, faded ink, a family tree with a crest at the top, all of it looking every inch as ancient and official as the courthouse it came from. And then he offers you a way out. You may keep your home, your well, your beams, your buried hopes for a price. A quitclaim, he calls it. A fee paid to the family to make the trouble go away. It is far less than losing everything and you have a wife and children asleep in the next room, so you find the money. You pay the stranger. Thousands of you pay the stranger. Whole towns pay. The railroad pays. The great silver mine pays. Because the papers are real, anyone can see that the papers are real. Now hold that afternoon in your mind, that calm man with the leather case, because here is the thing that should stop your heart. There was no Spanish family. There was no ancient grant. Every seal, every signature, every yellowed page in that leather case was a forgery. And behind the whole towering structure of it stood one man, a former streetcar conductor from Missouri, who had, with nothing but a pen and a terrifying amount of patience, invented an entire aristocracy, planted its fake bones in the sacred archives of 2 continents, and then walked up to your gate to charge you rent on land he had quite literally dreamed up. He nearly got away with a slice of the American Southwest the size of a small country, and the reason he nearly got away with it is the most unsettling part of all. His lie was built so slowly and so well that it stopped looking like a lie and started looking like history. Evening. I'm Eddie. Come in, shut the door behind you, and don't mind the maps. I've been up half the night with them. If you've not sat with me before, here's how it works down in these cheap seats. I take the greatest swindlers, forgers, and impostors that history has to offer. I lay them out on the table like a card sharp laying out a rigged deck, and the two of us marvel at the sheer, magnificent nerve of them. I'm a fan, I'll confess it. Never pulled a real con in my life. The closest my mate Sully and I ever came was convincing a wine merchant we were buyers for a hotel that did not, strictly speaking, exist. And we got a rather good lunch out of it before the bill arrived, and reality did too. So no, I'm not the operator. I'm the fellow in the back row, leaning forward, whispering how on earth did he manage that. And tonight I have got a beauty for you, because most of my favorite liars steal a painting or a signature or a rich widow's savings. This man tried to steal a territory. Not a bank, a territory. 12 million acres of the American Southwest, an area bigger than some whole countries, complete with a city, a railroad, and one of the richest silver mines in the world. All of it taken not at gunpoint, not with a mask and a getaway horse, but with a pen, a pot of ink, and the most patient forgery campaign I have ever come across in my life. His name was James Addison Reavis, and for a few golden years they called him the Baron of Arizona. He wore silk. He dined with senators, and he had built the entire foundation of his fortune out of documents that he had aged and stained and slipped like poison into the real historical record. So let me tell you about the man who forged a country's past to steal its present, and how close, how heart-stoppingly close, he came to keeping it. Let me give you the man first, and the honest edges of what we know, because with a professional liar the edges matter more than usual. James Addison Reavis was born in Missouri in 1843 to a family of no particular grandeur. When the Civil War came, he served as a Confederate soldier, and it was there, in the tedium of army life, of all the dull places, that he stumbled onto the gift that would define him. He discovered, apparently almost by accident, that he could copy his officers' signatures perfectly. He forged himself passes. He forged himself furloughs, little slips of paper that let a bored young soldier wander off when he pleased. And he noticed something that would sit in the back of his mind for the rest of his life. Nobody could tell. His hand, when he chose, could become another man's hand, and the world could not see the join. After the war, he did what a great many restless, clever men did, a bit of this, a bit of that. He worked at one point as a streetcar conductor in St. Louis, punching tickets, making change. A perfectly ordinary man in a perfectly ordinary uniform, riding the rails of the city back and forth, and I want you to hold on to that image because it's important. The Baron of Arizona, the man who dined with the powerful and claimed a fortune the size of a nation, started out counting nickels on a trolley car. He also dealt a little in real estate, and that is where the two halves of him met and became dangerous. Because in the property business he learned how land titles work, how old claims are proved, what a deed is supposed to look like, which offices hold which records. He learned, in other words, the grammar of ownership, and he already knew how to forge. Now the caveat, and I'll be straight with you because I always am. Reavis's story has been told and retold, and along the way it has been buffed and dramatized. There is even a 1950 Hollywood picture, The Baron of Arizona, with Vincent Price playing him as a silky villain, and that film, like all such films, invents and rearranges for effect. So when I give you a perfect little scene, a perfect line, hold it a touch loosely. But the spine of this, the fabricated Spanish grant, the forged documents planted across 2 continents, the millions of acres, the real people who paid him, and the government investigation that finally tore it apart, that spine is solid, and it is written down in the coldest, least romantic place imaginable, the records of a United States court. We'll get there. So here is the genius of it, and I mean genius the way you'd admire a beautiful trap even as it horrifies you. Reavis did not fight the law. Fighting the law is for amateurs and for men with guns. Reavis understood something far more elegant, that the surest place to hide a monstrous lie is inside a true and honorable rule. And the rule was this. In 1848, the war between the United States and Mexico ended with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and by that treaty, the United States took an enormous stretch of the Southwest, including what would become the Arizona Territory. But the treaty came with a promise, a decent and civilized promise, that the United States would honor the land grants that Spain and then Mexico had already made to their own people. If your family had been granted land by the Spanish crown a century before, that grant did not evaporate just because the flag over the territory had changed. America was bound, in law and in honor, to recognize it. Do you see the door that opens? Reavis certainly did. He didn't need to seize the land. He didn't need to outshoot anyone or outbid anyone. He needed only to manufacture a genuine-looking old Spanish grant. And then the full weight of American law, the courts, the government, the treaty, all of it would swing around and enforce his lie for him, at no charge, against the very people living on the land. He wasn't planning to break into the house. He was planning to forge the deed and let the sheriff hand him the keys. The most dangerous cons never break the rules. They wear them. But a grant needs someone to have been granted it. And so Reavis did the thing that lifts this from a swindle into something closer to a dark act of creation. He invented a man. He conjured out of nothing but ambition and ink a Spanish nobleman. Don Miguel de Peralta, a grandee of the Spanish Empire, supposedly granted this vast domain by the Spanish crown back in the 1740s and 50s, as a reward for service, with a grand title to match the barony of Arizona. And Reavis did not stop at one man. A single ancestor is a claim. A family is a history. So he built the Peraltas a lineage, generations of them, marrying, being born, being baptized, inheriting, dying, handing the great grant down the years like a family heirloom, all the way to a last surviving heir in the present day. He gave them a story with the deep, boring, load-bearing details that real families have, and invented ones usually don't. Dates, names, places, the small, dull machinery of descent that no one questions precisely because it is so dull. And here I have to stop and make you feel the scale of the patience involved, because this is the part that separates Reavis from every smash-and-grab con I've ever shown you. This was not an afternoon's work. This was not a forged check cashed on a Friday. Building the Peraltas and building the evidence that they had ever existed was the labor of years. Years. He was, in effect, writing a historical novel, except that his readers were going to be judges and archivists and government surveyors, and the novel had to survive their scrutiny not as fiction but as fact. Most con men are sprinters. Reavis was running a marathon that he could not see the end of, on the bet that at the finish line lay an empire. So how do you make a family that never lived leave footprints across 100 years of real history? And here is where I have to be careful with you, and I will be, because I love the audacity of this and I am going to show it to you. But I am showing you a specimen under glass, not handing you a shovel. This is a warning with the workings visible, not a set of instructions, and the difference matters, so keep it in mind. Reavis understood that a document does not prove itself. It is proved by where it lives. A deed sitting in a stranger's pocket is worthless and suspicious, but a deed found inside a genuine church register, in a real government archive, filed among 10,000 authentic pages that everyone already trusts, that document borrows the credibility of everything around it. Nobody suspects the one poison page in a cabinet of honest ones, because the cabinet itself is beyond question. So Reavis did not try to convince the world with a document. He tried to corrupt the archives the world already believed. And he went to extraordinary lengths. He traveled to Mexico, to the great archives in Guadalajara and in Mexico City, and across the ocean to Spain, to the old imperial records in Seville where the papers of the Spanish Empire were kept, and into those real collections by the accounts that come down to us, when his fabrications forged royal decrees, invented baptismal records, marriage entries for people who were never born and never wed, altered registers, seals that aped the seals of a long-dead crown. He aged the paper. He aged the ink. He made his lies look old, and then he tucked them into the one place where old things are trusted without a second glance. When an investigator, years later, went looking to check the Peralta claim, the trail did not dead-end at a con man's forgery. It led, horrifyingly, into the real national archives of Spain and Mexico, and there, waiting, dressed in 100 years of false dust, were the Peraltas. He had not just told a lie. He had planted the evidence for it inside the memory of two nations. But a dead Grant needs a living hand to hold it. All those generations of invented Peraltas were only useful if they arrived, at last, at a real person in the present who could stand up and say, "I am the heir. I own this." And so Reavis did the coldest thing in the whole story, the part where the con stops being a marvel of paperwork and touches a real human life. He found a young woman. The accounts describe a girl of humble origins, and Reavis took her, and there is no gentler way to say it, he groomed her for the role. He gave her a new past. He told her and told the world that she was the last of the Peraltas, Dona Sofia, the orphaned heiress of the great Spanish barony, carrier of the blood and the birthright. And then he married her, which meant that the vast estate, the whole invented empire, now had a flesh and blood mistress, and Reavis himself became, by marriage, its lord. The Baron of Arizona and his Baroness. He didn't just forge the deed. He cast the part, coached the performance, and then wrote himself into it as the leading man. Whether she fully understood what she was, and how much was done to her rather than by her, is one of the sadder open questions in this whole affair, and I'm not going to pretend to you that I can settle it. And then, and this is the part that ought to genuinely frighten you, it worked. For years it worked. Reavis pressed his claim, and the sheer, documented, archive-backed weight of it landed on the Arizona territory like a slow avalanche. Think about what he was claiming. Roughly 18,000 square miles, some 12 million acres, sweeping across the territory and into New Mexico. It swallowed farms and ranches by the hundred. It swallowed the growing city of Phoenix. The whole city, sitting, according to Reavis, on Peralta land. It swallowed the Silver King mine, one of the richest silver mines in the region, a genuine fortune in the ground. And it swallowed the main line of the Southern Pacific Railroad, one of the most powerful corporations in the American West, whose trains now ran, if Reavis was to be believed, across his private estate. So the money came in. Terrified homesteaders, exactly like the one I put you inside at the start, paid him quitclaims to keep their homes. Businesses paid. And here is the tell of how convincing the thing was. The mighty Southern Pacific Railroad itself, and the owners of the Silver King, men with lawyers and money and every reason to fight, looked hard at the Peralta documents and decided it was cheaper and safer to pay. To settle, to buy peace from the Baron rather than risk a court ruling that he truly owned the ground their rails and their shafts sat on. When the railroad blinks, my friend, the paperwork is good. And Reavis rose. He took the money and he became the character he had written. He and Sofia lived like royalty on two continents, fine houses, servants, silk, society. He was fated. He mingled with senators and financiers and lords. The streetcar conductor from St. Louis, the man who had punched tickets for nickels, now moved through drawing rooms as a titled grandee with an empire at his back. And the terrible truth is that in those years he had earned it in the only sense a con man ever earns anything. The lie was standing up, the money was real, and the world was bowing. If he had stopped there, but they never stopped there. Because a claim that big cannot simply be paid off forever. 12 million acres is not a quiet fraud. It's a scream. And eventually the United States government itself had to rule formally on whether the Peralta Grant was real, because so much land, so many towns, so much of a territory's future hung on the answer. And that meant somebody, at last, was going to open the leather case and actually check. That somebody was the Surveyor General of Arizona, a man named Royal A. Johnson, and I want you to give him a moment of respect, because he is the quiet hero of this story, and he did the single hardest, least glamorous thing a person can do in the face of a beautiful, confident lie. He refused to be impressed. Everyone around him could see the documents, the seals, the century of dust, the archives, the railroad's own surrender, and everyone was inclined to believe. Johnson looked at the same overwhelming evidence and did the rude, slow, unpopular thing. He started pulling on the threads. And rule one of any con, my friend. The forger's greatest enemy is not the big, dramatic mistake. It's the tiny, boring detail that he could not possibly have known he needed to get right. Reavis had thought of so much. He had thought of the seals and the lineage and the archives and the aging of the paper. But a forgery of the past has to be perfect in 10,000 dimensions at once. And the truth, the real, actual past had left fingerprints everywhere, in places Reavis never thought to check. And when Johnson and the investigators went looking, the fingerprints were there. The documents, meant to be 150 years old, began to betray their real age in a dozen small, damning ways. The paper was wrong. Some of it was of a kind that had not existed in the 1700s, watermarks too modern, stock milled long after the date on the page. The printing was wrong. Certain documents used typefaces, printed letter forms that no printer in the supposed era could have set because they had not been designed yet. The very letters were confessions, and the writing itself gave him away, the ink, the strokes, the instrument. In places the marks were those of a steel pen, a nib of a sort that belonged to Reavis's own century, pressed onto pages that were supposed to have been written with a quill 100 years before the steel pen was in any clerk's hand, and the handwriting of one of his supposed old monks, his churchmen, simply did not fit the time or the place it claimed to come from. Do you feel the horror of it from Reavis's side? He had done everything right except the things he didn't know were things. He was a man of the 1880s trying to think like a man of the 1740s, and you cannot fully do it because you don't know what you don't know. You reach for a pen without thinking, and it's the wrong pen by a century. You use a paper because it looks old, and it was made in a mill your grandfather was too young to have seen. His lie was, in the end, undone by the one witness no forger can bribe or plant or bury. The actual texture of the past, which does not match the counterfeit no matter how carefully the counterfeit is aged. The trail was too perfect, and it was too new. And once the first thread came loose, the whole magnificent tapestry ran. The case went before the Court of Private Land Claims, the very court set up to sort the real old Spanish and Mexican grants from the false ones. And in 1895 that court did what Royal A. Johnson's work had made inevitable. It declared the Peralta Grant a fraud, a fabrication. There had been no Don Miguel de Peralta. There had been no barony. There was no ancient family and no crown grant and no lawful owner of the 12 million acres, and there never had been. The whole shimmering empire simply blinked out, and underneath it was nothing but the ink of a clever, patient man from Missouri. The next year, in 1896, Reavis was tried and convicted for forgery, for conspiracy to defraud the government. The Baron of Arizona went to federal prison, and he served, in the end, only about 2 years, a stretch that feels almost insulting against the scale of what he tried to steal, though I'd remind you that the sentence he really served was longer and worse than any court handed down, because when he came out, everything was gone. The money was spent or clawed back. The society that had fated him wanted nothing to do with him. Sofia, the invented heiress, the woman he had built a whole false life around, left him. The title was a joke now, a punchline in the newspapers. And James Addison Reavis, who had for a few years plausibly claimed to own more land than some kings, lived out his last years in poverty and obscurity, a curiosity, a forgotten name, and died in 1914 a pauper. The man who forged a fortune the size of a nation could not, at the end, afford his own funeral. There is a grim symmetry in that which I don't think even Vincent Price could have improved. So let's ask the real question, the one that should be gnawing at you the way it gnaws at me. Not how did he forge the documents, we've seen the shape of that, the borrowed credibility, the poisoned archives, the patience. The real question is worse. How did it get so far? How did homesteaders, businesses, a silver mining fortune, and one of the most powerful railroads in America all look at this man's claim and reach for their checkbooks? These were not fools. The railroad had lawyers whose whole job was to smell a rat. And I think the uncomfortable answer is this. Reavis did not defeat their intelligence. He defeated their instinct to check, the same instinct that would have caught him, and eventually did, in the hands of one stubborn surveyor general. Everyone who paid him looked at the documents and saw age, saw officialdom, saw the seals and the dust and the archive stamps, and their minds did the thing our minds always do with an overwhelming display of authority. They filled in the gap. They assumed that somewhere, somebody at some point must have really verified all this. Because surely a claim this large, backed by papers this old, sitting in archives this real, had already been checked by someone. Each person trusted that somebody else had done the checking. And in that gap, the gap between an official-looking thing and an actually verified thing, Reavis built an empire. He is the proof, in yellowed ink, of how much of the world runs not on truth but on the confident appearance of it. And here is why I really keep this one on the shelf, why I didn't just tell it to you for the sheer gorgeous nerve of it, because it's about you and me a great deal more than it's about a dead forger from Missouri. We picture theft, don't we, as something loud and fast, a masked man, a gun, a cracked safe, a getaway. We picture the thief as someone who breaks in, and that picture is exactly why a man like Reavis is so dangerous, because he doesn't break anything. He doesn't sprint. He builds slowly, patiently, respectably, until the lie has been standing so long and looks so weathered and sits so comfortably among the trusted things that it stops setting off any alarm at all. He nearly stole an entire territory not with a weapon but with a pen, a pot of ink, and time. And the reason it almost worked is that the slower and more patient a lie is, the more it looks like history, and we do not question history. We check the stranger at the door. We do not check the thing that has apparently always been there. So turn that toward your own life for a second, wherever you're sitting. The documents you have never actually read, the terms, the title, the deed, the policy, the family story everyone just knows is true. The institutions you trust precisely because they are old and official and dusty, and surely already checked by someone. Most of them are honest, exactly as most old grants really were honest. But the reflex that protects the honest ones, the reflex to trust the aged, official, confident thing without personally checking it, is the very same reflex that Reavis lived inside and grew fat inside for years. He didn't beat the smartest people in the room. He beat their assumption that somebody else had already looked. The single tell, the one thread that unraveled 12 million acres, was never do these documents look old and official. They looked magnificently old and official. The tell was quieter and ruder, and it's the one almost nobody in Arizona was willing to reach for until Royal A. Johnson did. Has anyone actually, personally, checked whether the thing is real, or are we all just trusting that it's old and assuming somebody else already did? The moment a claim's whole power rests on nobody being willing to check it, you are standing exactly where those homesteaders stood, reaching for your money, staring at a leather case full of beautiful, confident, poison paper. So that's my question for you tonight, and I do read the comments, so come down and find me. When have you trusted the old, official, confident thing, the document, the institution, the story everyone knows purely because it looked settled and ancient and surely already checked? And were you right too, or did it come apart later? And the flip side, the one I'm greedy for. Has anyone ever tried to sell you your own ground back, some modern Reavis, some claim or fee or demand dressed up in enough official-looking paper that you very nearly paid before you thought to ask whether it was real at all? Tell me both. The time the old paper fooled you, and the time you stopped and checked. Those stories keep the rest of us honest. Put them below. And if you like sitting in the back row with me, taking history's greatest cons apart to see what makes them tick, subscribe, and stick around, because there's a new one every few days, and I've a whole gallery of beautiful liars still to introduce you to. The man who sold a monument he did not own, the forger who fooled an empire and got paid for it, the impostor who convinced a whole family he was their own dead son. My nephew, sharp lad, thinks he's uncatchable, and last year he nearly wired his savings to a message that looked exactly, officially, calmly like a notice from a court, old-fashioned seal at the top. A case number, the works, demanding a fee to settle a claim against him. It was a Reavis in miniature, 130 years on, an official-looking document about land and money, betting he'd pay before he checked. He caught it with a minute to spare, and only because for 1 second he stopped asking, "Does this look official?" and started asking, "Have I actually checked?" That one question is the whole defense. It always has been. I'll leave you with this. James Reavis never forced a door or fired a shot. He simply understood that the world hands its trust to whatever is old enough, official enough, and confident enough, and that hardly anyone ever asks to see whether the old and official and confident thing is actually true. He nearly walked off with a corner of a continent on the strength of it. So the next time someone lays a beautiful, weathered, unquestionable-looking claim on your table and names a price to make it go away, do the one slow, unglamorous, faintly embarrassing thing that would have saved a whole territory years of grief. Don't admire how old it looks. Check whether it's real. I'm Eddie. Mind the confident strangers, and mind the ones bearing very old paper most of all. And that's how you lose your shirt.